Good morning. This is Jason Dean here at the YouTube headquarters. Appreciate everybody checking out the pages, the Film Fanatic Facebook page, the Instagram page, and the newest thing being this YouTube channel. It's been great. You know, it's been a super cool, fun learning experience. And I've been starting to do these different series. I did a series about a few weeks ago where I did all of the Friday the 13th films, and that was super fun. Now I'm doing everything related to the Halloween franchise. The difference is that I find, but again, it could change as I go, but as a whole and growing up, my favorite favorite franchise for horror and probably just in general is probably the Friday the 13th series. Like, I love all those movies. All those movies have some kind of meaning to me to some degree. Even the ones, like, from a technical standpoint, to a degree, a lot of those films kind of get a little bit worse as they go, and they get a little bit more convoluted maybe at times, but there's still a magic about those films that I still love, and they're just super fun. And when I did that series, it was it was pretty long, and it was pretty cool because I watched, every movie as I was reviewing them. I, usually watch the film at night and then do the review the next morning. And I tried to cover every film that I had in my box set that made up the franchise. But then I expanded it to just cover. There's been a few other movies that are not directly say related to that franchise, or at least movies that were not released in that box set. So I decided to cover those films too. The biggest one being Freddy vs. Jason, and it was really a great experience watching each movie back to back in the order that each year of every year that they came out. And I found myself enjoying the franchise again, all over again. And I made a lot of cool discoveries with certain films by watching them in context of succession of the previous film, and it in a lot of ways made things a lot more enjoyable and exciting. And I found myself enjoying some of the films in the franchise that I might have like kind of overlooked or didn't necessarily think they were that great. But overall, I have a real consistent feeling for that entire franchise. And then before that, I started to do a show. I did a show on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, and the first one, Texas, is one of my all time favorite movies of all time. Huge Toby Hooper fan. He has a whole great catalog of some great films he had done since the original Texas. So, but as a whole, I always had mixed things about the cohesiveness of the franchise. So I never really, pursued it as much. And I don't know. I tend to do films for this channel and for the shows, the video shows, and then just in general. I tend to just like do shows on movies that I really like and that I love, and that I don't like to do too many negative reviews. I mean, at times I'll do negative reviews or just things that I might not really can wrap my brain around. The last movie where I was kind of, I don't know, harsh or I was very critical of was the last Matrix movie. But generally, I try not to stay. I try to stay on a path of like working with films that I really love and that I find inspiring that are consistent. Because I feel like there's already a lot of negativity out there. But that being said, as a fan and as someone who has a deep appreciation, I think you need to be, you need to be honest. I don't think that should any of those things should shift as far as a person who's reviewing films. They should still tell from their heart of how those things feel. Recently, I saw a show with a YouTube guy that I really love who has helped definitely was an inspiration for me to do this channel. Chris Stuckman. He's like the Godzilla of the YouTube world. He's huge. He's the biggest. He's definitely the biggest guy on the whole entire in the YouTube universe, and he makes his living basically off of, the channel. And now he's actually moved into where he's a film director now, and he has a film coming out probably next year. But it was interesting because his show has always been a real big source of entertainment for me, and a great source of inspiration to try to do these things. Um, but he would mix it up. He mostly would cover a lot of newer films. So that was where I was hearing about, and where I got inklings of movies I had not heard about. I would usually check out his channel, so that was really helpful, particularly when I go to the theater, which has been pretty sporadic. I'm hoping to start doing that again. But for a while, I was going to the theater a lot to see movies, and his his reviews are really kind of integral to turning me on to certain films I would have probably passed on, or just maybe had not heard of. The two of the biggest films for me that I really love, that I got turned on by him through his channel, was The Invisible Man, the remake that came out a couple of years ago, which I just think is an amazing movie. And I'm going to definitely do a show on that. And then another show, another movie that I saw fairly recently in the theater was X. That was a movie I had not heard anything about until I saw a little bit of a review of his on the channel. And just an incredible horror movie, one of the best modern slasher movies I've seen in years. So it's a great thing. But I noticed when he was talking about, for him personally making that transition to become a filmmaker, he decided to change his channel to a degree, as far as, he would usually cover movies that he really loved, obviously, and reviews of new things. But then he would also cover movies that he felt, he didn't necessarily like, but he would kind of give them, negative reviews. But, he's a real, I think he's, a bona fide professional. I think he's a great journalist. I think he does his research. I think he understands what makes a film good, and I feel like he's got that credibility. He's got that skill set. So he's like that person who I think is very reliable and pretty fair. As opposed to like maybe just somebody who is maybe not so articulate, or somebody who doesn't have that skill set, or doesn't have that that knowledge of really diving into film. Where you have the generation too of where, because technology is so accessible now, to a degree everybody can kind of be a critic, and maybe they're not qualified to necessarily, maybe they shouldn't be doing what they're doing because they're just not, they don't have that skill set. And that's a big thing where, you kind of hear that argument, well, everybody and their grandmother now is doing it, in the music industry, and then also in the film industry, or YouTube channels, and what have you. Everybody's a critic. And that's easily a conversation that has merit. But I think we've always had people like that. I think with technology and social media, it's easier for people to get their voices out there. But at the end of the day, it's not anything different. I think, people who are going to say what they want to say, and do what they want to do. They might just have a little bit of, more of a voice to say those things. But at the end of the day, I think that stuff kind of gets weeded out. And but Chris Tuckman was saying how he was going to, because he was an actual filmmaker now, he was going to change his whole thing, as far as not really reviewing movies that he didn't like, and changing kind of his format, and just focusing on films that he really loves, because he felt, well, with the problem of trying to, for the industry, the theater industry, to survive, against the odds and the hurdles of trying to compete with the streaming platforms, which was really hard. He felt by him, contributing negative reviews would hurt and keep people away from going to theaters, where he was like, no, people should go out to the theaters and still and still, show their support for this great art form. So he decided not to. He's decided not to really, do that. And and he's an incredibly talented guy. But at the end of the day, in my own humble opinion, I kind of disagree with that. I feel, if anything, people like he's a legitimate source, and I feel like he's very fair and balanced, even if he's critical. He's not involved with, say, certain people out there that do have YouTube channels where their thing is where they just initially try to attack things and try to be come across as very angry, and an unfortunate aspect of our culture now is when people kind of get attacked, or when people use harsh words or harsh language, and they're not really using it in a critical way or an intelligent way. That often gets a lot of hits. That often gets excitement from the audience. It's kind of like driving by a car accident, and you end up slowing down, and it gets all this attention, even though it's kind of a terrible thing. But I think somebody of his caliber, Chris Tuckman's caliber, like he's a very intelligent and sound reviewer, and he knows what he's talking about, and he can do things and talk about things in a negative way, but not be a bully about it. So I feel like he could still do what he does in any capacity and not have to worry about that, because in regards to the streaming world, those things, it's going to be interesting to see where those things go. In the face of like people like me who buy tickets and go to the theater for the true film going experience. Technology is not going to slow down, but I still think we need critical thinking and reviews of films that are with somebody who has the real skill set to be critical of certain things and question things. I think that's really needed, but a person can do it in a way where they're not coming across as a bully and mean, and you can still be very, very respectful. And I think in some ways, the more respectful you are, even of negative things, you kind of push the conversation into moving into an area where people can have civil discourse about something. But that's just my thing. So getting back to this, is the next franchise I'm going to be covering. This is a film franchise I really have mixed things about. Compared to the Friday 13th films, there's a lot of films I don't really like in this franchise. But I'm going to still review a lot of these films because as a whole, I really love the whole mythology around Michael Myers and what John Carpenter started. And there's about 4 or 5 films in the franchise that I really love. Obviously, the first one, amazing. It's a masterpiece by John Carpenter. I really like the second one. I watched that in succession. The second one obviously isn't quite up to speed because John Carpenter didn't. It's not quite on par as the first one, but it's still a great movie, and I found it very entertaining, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And so I'm going to get through most of these films, and I'm going to make this into the next big series because it's Halloween season and it's a lot of fun. And I feel like some of these films that maybe I didn't like in the past might make more sense to me, or I might find myself enjoying and watching them in succession. So this brings me to probably, arguably, my favorite film in the franchise, if not tied with the very first one that came out in '78 by John Carpenter. I love this movie to death, and that is Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. This film is also one of the most despised film in the franchises, meaning because it's truly a standalone film. This is the only film, this one, and I feel the original, you can truly watch these by themselves. And this one is part 3, and they really were trying to do something new with this whole franchise, and it didn't connect to the audience. And it was directed by Tommy Lee Wallace, who was very much involved with the original. And it has Dean Cundey is back doing the cinematography for this film. Dean Cundey is my favorite cinematographer. He's worked on all of the classic John Carpenter movies. The Thing being probably the best thing he's ever done. But he's just an amazing cinematographer, and he brought his magic to this film. And they really tried to do something different. The studio really wanted to make these films that were Halloween related, but they could be their own spin off movies, meaning they could cover many different topics. And they barely have anything, if anything at all, to do with the Michael Myers mythology. But I think it was a really smart move. Like, this movie has more, I think, in common, say, with Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's an amazing sci-fi horror blend of, and there's also a lot of like humor in this film, and it's very much a B movie. I would kind of consider this to be an exploitation movie, a grindhouse film to that degree. It's got all these qualities, but it's very much in the mode of more of a science fiction kind of a vibe. And I bought this Blu-ray last or about 2 years ago, and I've seen this so many times. And the special features on here are just fabulous because they talk about how the filmmakers were talking about how they were really trying to take a chance because this movie's kind of crazy and kind of bonkers. And a lot of people after the film came out that were involved with the film kind of distanced themselves from this film because they felt this was like a commercial, a big time commercial failure. But over the years, this film has come back as being this really big cult favorite. And there's some great special features on here, and there's a lot of great interviews with Tommy Lee Wallace, the director, where he talked about they were really, he wasn't interested at all in doing like a continuation of the Michael Myers story. He felt it was kind of over and came to a conclusion by part two. So they had this idea to go on this adventure and try something totally new. It's there's little kernels and there's little aspects of the original film that are in this, but other than that, it's a completely original story. And this is probably one of my favorite Blu-rays in my collection. Not only do I love this film so much, but it's just bonkers crazy. It's super entertaining. It's funny as hell, and the kills are amazing. Like, the kills are brutal, and I love because you don't know. It's so unpredictable, especially the first few times you watch it. It goes into directions where you don't expect, and it's super entertaining. And I think it's John Carpenter did the music for this film, and I feel like this might be the best music he's ever done, aside from the iconic music from Halloween. It's just amazing. It's this whole movie encapsulates '80s, the whole '80s, B movie explosion, or even though it's not a slasher film, it has that vibe. It's not a slasher film per se, but it has that. It has that essence. And I think it's like easily the best music that John Carpenter has ever composed. The special features on here are just pretty amazing. Really great in-depth interviews with the cast and the filmmakers, and they really they're really honest to a really kind of surprising degree about how they dealt with the failure of this film, and seeing like how many years later, Tommy Lee Wallace was said that he basically, after this film came out, and the rest of the filmmakers, they just the rest of the people involved, Deborah Hill, who is the producer, and Dean Cundey, who did the cinematography, they basically wrote this movie off that it was okay. We tried to do something new, and we knew it was a risk, but ultimately it was a big failure. So they just kind of moved on from it, and then they just kind of forgot about it. And I think it was only actually in theatrical release for like a couple of weeks, and then the studio took it out because people were expecting the mass killer scenario, the shape Michael Myers to be in, and that it was going to be tied in with the whole mythology, but it had nothing to do with it. But he was talking about Tommy Lee Wallace was like after about 10 years or 15 years went by, he noticed that like he was getting these emails, he was getting, and people were contacting him about this film. And then eventually he started being invited to go to these conventions, and he met thousands and thousands of people that were like, no, we really love this movie. This movie is like, this might be our favorite in the entire franchise. So it really grew into this massive cult following. And there's been a few different editions of this movie that have come out because of that. This is one that came out maybe three years ago, and it's all due to kind of the grassroots, fans of people like me who were like, no, this is a really great movie, and it should get some kind of respect, and so it's an amazing thing that this film came out. So I highly recommend watching this film. I just watched it again the other night, and I can't get enough of this film. I'm probably going to watch it again. So Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Just a fabulous movie. It came out in 1982 too. So this is Jason Dean. So if you get a chance, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time. Peace.